In this part 2, we are discussing about the operating system services. There are basically two kinds of services the operating system provides, that is the user services and the system services. Under user services, first we have program execution. In the part 1, we have told that an example for a C program whose source code is basically stored in the hard disk, and from the hard disk, in order to make the source code to be executed by the CPU, we have to convert or load this to the main memory. So operating system actually does that by changing the secondary memory to the main memory in the other example which we have discussed. So operating system basically helps to load the program to the main memory for CPU execution, because CPU can only access those in the main memory. The next function which is done by here is the user interface. User interface means, if there is user interface, we know that in order to user to communicate with the computer, it is through all the instructions. A lot of instructions will be there, but this user interface is made easy for to communicate with the computer. So it operating system helps in this user interface. Actually, there are basically two user interface which is provided by the operating system, that is command line interface and graphic user interface. Command line interface, basically DOS operating system uses this command line interface. This is text-based command. Graphic user interface, you can see the folder, the visibility. That is in Windows and Linux. In your computer, if you see Windows and Linux, it's all graphical user interfaces happening here. The operating system used would be graphical user interface, right? So this is the basic two things that you have to remember from the user interface, that is command line interface and graphical user interface. Okay, so first we have to talk about the first service, that is the program execution. Then we talk about the user interface. Next service which is provided by the operating system is IO operation. When you talk about IO operation, we know to control the keyboard, that is to control input devices like keyboard and other devices. To control the memory, we have memory controller. To control a video, you have the monitor controller. Keyboard, if you want to control, you have the keyboard controller. You can talk about the keyboard, right? You have the keyboard controller. So there are a lot of device controllers. Now operating system manages all of these device controllers. So what does operating system do? These devices, that is this devices which we have discussed before, is basically controlled by the operating system. This is the third service under the user services. So first was the program execution, then we discussed the about this then we discussed about here was the user interface. Then we have discussed finally about those control devices, right? To control the devices, input output devices, right? This is basically the third. Now we have the communication. So the communication, the CPU basically, the OS basically helps to communicate between the different processes. This is basically has another thing, that is IPC. IPC is what? Inter-process communications. Processes can be the processes, 2 or 3 processes can communicate with each other. The processes can be in the same system or it can be in the different system. That is a network, right? So such things are also possible. That is communication. So program execution was there, and the second we talk about was the user interface. Then we talk about the input output. Then we talk about communication under the user services. Then we have file system manipulation. So file, the data can be stored in the file. The data can be retrieved from the file. You can basically search the file, delete the file, create file. These are the things that you can do with files. In order to do this, operating system helps in the manipulating all these files. Okay, so that is, data. What are the operations that you can basically do in a file? The data can be stored in the file. The data can be retrieved. You can create files. You can delete files. You can also update it. You can search the different files. All these things are done. So operating system helps in doing these things. Now next is the error detection. We know in program error or in any hardware error, errors will occur. So what does operating system do? Operating system basically report these errors to the user. Okay, it tells, okay, there is some error which basically occurred here. So it basically report these errors. So that is the one thing the operating system do. So OS itself can also finally debug these errors also. There are a lot of other service which is provided is error detection. So this basically helps to make the system works consistently, right? So this much we have understood. So there are different services under the user services. The first service was which we talked about was a program execution, then user interface, then IO devices case, right? Then we can communicate, the file system management, the file system manipulation, then error detection, right? These are the user services. Then you can see that we have resource allocation, that is coming under system services. Now system services which is provided by the OS, first is resource allocation, that is allocating the resources among the different processes. That is, if process 1 and process 2 come and both want the same resources, the OS helps in reducing the waiting time. That is, process 1 takes the data from this resources. After it finishes this, only the process 2 can take this data. So that means it reduces the waiting time. And the resource allocation and or processing processes will discuss in a lot of scheduling algorithms are there. All this will detailedly discussed in the operating system concept itself. Now you have to understand that operating systems, one of the system service it provides is resource allocation, that is allocating the resources to each and every process without overlapping. This is important, allocating the resources to each and every process without overlapping. So this is what I just told right now. Process 2 has to wait until the process 1 finishes using the resources, right? Now therefore we can say that resource allocation, that is optimal utilization of resources, another function which is provided by our operating system, that is optimal utilization of the resources. Now we have accounting, the second system resource system service which is done by the operating system is accounting. That is, different users have different accounts, right? Different accounts. So multiple, if you each user, like if there's a person A and a person B, each of these person have different accounts. Now since it has different accounts, there will be password and security protection to these accounts. So the third service is security and protection. We will prevent unauthorized access to the data and files. So it can use also, the operating system also use firewalls for the security purpose. Now all accounts have permissions to access. Only those accounts which has a permission can only access this, right? So the third service which is provided by the operating system is security and protection. So these are the services which is basically provided by the operating system. Thanks.